if you probably picked any other career and you had spent a decade working on it and were really good at it, you'd probably be really successful and have a good life.
How much money has the first feature that you made, Living Life, made total?
It probably hasn't made really barely any money. I mean, it was they paid a small fee to me to go kind of work on it when they first picked it up, and they paid to finish it and put it on film and release it and market it. But I don't think they ever even made their money back on it. I mean, it had a small theatrical release in a couple cities. It played, on I think internationally in a few countries and a few TV markets. But the distributor was, they were kind of this tiny little indie distributor. At the time back then, there was all these little companies popping up. And I think they meant well, but I don't think they really knew how to kind of get a film out there. And so I don't think it ended up really making very much money for them. I definitely didn't recoup the money that my parents had given me to make the movie. But again, for me, it was never about that. I mean, they were never expecting that in the first place. I mean, it wasn't like an investment either. It was the money I would have used. They would have given me if I had, gone to pay to a film school or something, right? And so, yeah, I don't think it made money, but it obviously made just so much for me in terms of it's what gave me the inspiration to start this film festival for young filmmakers, which then led to starting to do commercials, which then led me back to making a film again. And so it was definitely a life-changing experience. And yeah, just an incredible thing that I was able to pull off at such a young age.
Do you think a filmmaker should expect to make money or recoup their costs for their first feature film?
It's hard to say, I mean, I think that it all probably depends on the scale and size of the film. I mean, I think that ideally, you start something small and you build from there. And obviously, things are changing all the time. I think budgets are getting smaller because they're being forced to be because the people are paying less for them. Distributors are. But I think, especially if you're going to make a movie for any sort of larger amount of money that isn't your own money, you should try to have the intention be to make money because you don't want to just be taking people's money and with no intention to make it back, obviously. But I think the best thing would be to kind of start something small that you could pull off and make good, but then would have the ability to maybe make some money back. I mean, maybe you could find a contained film that would only cost $100,000 or $200,000 or something, which is still a lot of money, but it's probably a more realistic amount of money that you could make back versus a couple $1,000,000, even if you could get that money. And so, but I think to make money personally as a filmmaker, that's always a long shot. I think that's multiple films in being very successful when you would ever do that. I mean, I think at this stage for most filmmakers, you're just lucky to have been able to make the film, and if anything happens beyond that, that's just, a wonderful dream.
And have it shown in theaters as well. I mean, that's a rarity too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially now more than ever, it's rare to get something in the theater. And if you'd asked me several years ago, I probably would have been like, that's the ultimate thing. Now, it's hard to even say, right? Because you probably have a lot better reach if you were on something like Netflix. It's not as theatrical, and there's a lot of issues probably with some of that distribution because it's like it's on there and it gets lost, right? It's not very curated, but it's hard to say. I think there's gonna be a lot of change in the next few years in terms of how people see films and what is the best way to get it out to people. But of course, I like nothing more than being in a theater with a bunch of people and watching it and kind of feeling it with them. So I would love to always be able to have a film in a theater for sure.
So the filmmaker quandary of you want to make films, you may or may not make a living at it. You may or may not have to take other jobs. What are your thoughts on that? What's your advice to other filmmakers?
It's definitely the hardest thing about being a filmmaker, right? I mean, if you probably picked any other career and you had spent a decade working on it and were really good at it, you'd probably be really successful and have a good life, whether it was a doctor or a business or whatever, right? Whereas a filmmaker, you could do that and you could still be pretty poor after being pretty successful, right? Or struggling to get by. And so I think it's probably one of the hardest careers you could ever pick because even when you get successful, it's still, you got to keep going, right? So it's definitely not for people that want the easiest life, of course, but I think if you are that kind of person, and I'm one of those people, there's nothing else I would do. I wouldn't know what I would do if I couldn't make movies, And so one way or the other, I know I'm going to figure out how to do it. And the hope is that you can kind of keep building and get bigger. I think things like commercials and branded kind of stuff is a really good way for filmmakers to try to make money and make a living doing filmmaking, because there is it is an actual business there where you get paid, to go and make something, but you're still telling stories. You're still being a filmmaker. So I think, that's the path I kind of took to be able to kind of support myself while not having a day job or whatever. So that's not easy to get into that either, but I think that's kind of one way to go about it. But on the other hand, if you also want to be a writer or something like that, maybe you should take a normal job and then spend your free time, or the time you can take off because of that job to then just write or to focus on that. So I don't know if there's one perfect way, but it's definitely not an easy career. And I don't think you should go into it thinking you're going to become rich and famous, but because you want to do this because it's what you love.
Well, it sounds like you have to be prepared to be very resourceful and just not needing everything spelled out for you. It sounds like you've pieced together a lot of things on your own.
Yeah, 100%. It's just all about putting together that puzzle of how you can pull something off, and then at the same time how you can kind of make a living, and that still amounts for me. I've just made a film, but I still have to do commercials too. I'm trying to write other stuff, so I don't think it ever stops. It's always just kind of this I don't know what you would call it, this dance, I guess, of trying to figure that out. But yeah, I don't know. I couldn't do anything else. I know that.
Did you ever have a day job for a short time?
Never like a traditional day job. The closest thing was running this film festival, which was a day job. I'd go in there every day and do it. We had an office for a while. So that was my day job, but it was different because I had created it and it was something I was super excited about it. I don't think I could be the person who sits in the office and works for someone else. That's just not me, especially at this point. I would figure out something else I would have to do, if that was what I had to go. But again, that just kind of fits with my personality, which is I don't like to be forced to do something. I want to just go and make something. So I think I would rather become a tour guide in some other country, or I don't know, do something totally random that wasn't being kind of controlled and forced into a career. But yeah.
Magician?
Yeah, maybe go back to that.
What advice would you give to 17, 18, 19-year-olds on making their first feature film?
I think if you were a really young, kind of late teenage, early 20s, trying to make a feature film, I think my first advice would be, is that actually the best thing to do? That's what I did. And it was the perfect thing, I guess, for me, because it led me to where I am now. But I just wonder, is it what's really going to help you the most? And so I think if you have an incredible feature script that is super personal and is something that could be made at a realistic budget and you feel really confident in, then go do that for sure. But maybe it would be better to make a short film or a proof of concept, or kind of develop your skills a little bit more. I think I had this idea when I was that age that I just had to make a feature film because that's what would legitimize me or allow me to kind of go make the next thing. And I think that was partly just because of the era, because short films weren't really available, because this was before kind of online platforms to watch them or anything like that. And so to be a filmmaker was to make a feature film. But I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. I think that you can make a short film and it can create other opportunities. Even in the feature I just made, in order to allow me to make this, I made a short film as a proof of concept, and so and that was essential. I had to do that. I don't think I would have been able to do it without that. And so I think my advice would just be to really make sure, if you're going to put in all the energy, is that the right thing? The other side of that is, I know a lot of people that just make short film after short film and never do a feature or never take that next step. So I also don't think you should just get stuck, because it's a huge amount of work to do any kind of film, whether it's a short film or a feature film. It's a huge amount of work. So I think it's just about figuring out what is going to help you the most excel and kind of make the next project from there. And if that means making a feature, then go do it. But maybe it means also pulling back a little bit and taking time to write that really compelling feature while you make a short or something else, or a documentary. I think that's, if I was giving this advice to myself, maybe just to slow down and pull back even, and I don't mean that and lose that excitement and that energy, but just be a little bit more strategic, I guess, about what you're going to go make. I don't know. That's not what I did, so it's funny that I'm saying that advice to people, but I did the complete opposite. I just dove in and did it. But I feel like the more sane advice would be to kind of take it a little slower.
Well, the environment has changed since 2003 when you, I mean,
For sure.
your story is very unique. I think it's very interesting. But I mean, to have, this thing in the back of the Variety or whatever publication that was to say, hey, we're looking for this, the whole thing is a very interesting journey. But for today's temperament and costs and everything. But can people get stuck in this sort of short film, just making one after another and never progressing, or is that not a bad thing?
I mean, I think people can definitely get stuck making short film after short film. I think if your intent is not to really become a career filmmaker, but just a lot of people make films, short films, and they have regular jobs, they have other things in their life. They just love making films, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, people should keep doing that. I mean, everyone should make a story if they're compelled to do it. But I think if you really want to be a director as your career, making a short film one after the other forever is either a sign that if it's not getting you somewhere else, then maybe there's problems with your filmmaking, or your something there is not working, or you need to reshift your focus. Maybe it's finding a story that's even more personal or compelling, or it's finding something someone else wrote if you're not the stronger writer, or maybe it's making a documentary. I don't know. Or maybe it's taking that leap to go then try to do a feature. It's really hard because it's like there's not one perfect path, and so it's hard to say. But I definitely think you want to kind of have some sort of momentum going, and if that's not happening, maybe you got to figure out a way to shift it up. Yeah.